New revelations on former President Biden's decline while he was in office, supposed to be doing his job for America. And new information now on the people in his inner circle and how the cover-up actually operated. People across the political spectrum are now recognizing what many Americans could see with their own eyes. We were reporting it. President Trump showing some sympathy and also pointing the finger at those around the former president. He posted this: Joe Biden was not for open borders. He never talked about open borders, where criminals of all kinds, shapes, and sizes can flow into our country at will. It was the people that knew he was cognitively impaired that took over the auto pen. They stole the presidency of the United States and put us in great danger. This is treason at the highest level. Flashback now to the legacy media's complete denial of the president's cognitive decline. Remember this.
Start your tape right now, because I'm about to tell you the truth. And F you if you can't handle the truth. This version of Biden, intellectually, analytically, is the best Biden ever.
Well, he awkwardly tried to defend those earlier this week.
Looking back at that, do you say, well, it was misleading to say best Biden ever without caveating it and say, except on the days when he's not the best Biden ever?
Well, but I never saw those days personally.
Well, you did, because you saw him address a dead congresswoman, and you saw him in South Carolina.
A dead congresswoman, yeah.
There were plenty of days in public when he was not the best Biden ever, and
yeah,
of course,
shortly after, he stumbled and bumbled around, Mark. I mean, yeah, he certainly did.
Well, it was his job as a host, as a journalist, to be able to see things. I guess he was just as imperceptive as the president. Oh, my goodness. Senior White House correspondent Peter Doocy. Peter.
And Harris, this is no longer just a story about transparency, because President Trump is accusing senior aides that worked here until just a couple months ago, the beginning of this year, of manipulating an ailing president for their own gain.
They didn't want him, and they were disappointed in getting him because they wanted Bernie Sanders. And then after about 2 weeks, they said, wait a minute, this is a gift. He'll do anything. We're going to use the auto pen. And they used the auto pen and everything. He didn't approve this stuff.
We have separately now been told by the newly formed personal office of the former president that Biden's last PSA, or prostate-specific antigen test, was in 2014 when he was still the vice president, and at the time, no prostate cancer was detected.
Now, it is true that a lot of people recommend not doing a prostate-specific antigen after 70, but President Biden's been in public life a very long time. He was vice president and had a lot of exams under 70, so it's a little surprising that they didn't do it, and maybe President Biden decided he didn't want to test. Many men do decide they don't want a PSA.
And when it comes to President Biden's decline, the official word from Biden world about all these news stories is that nothing has been revealed this week that shows that President Biden was anything but an effective president, whereas the official word from officials here now is that there was a big cover-up. Harris.
Well, okay, two things can be true, but not if they're opposite. You got to pick a lane here. We'll pick the truth. Peter, thank you. Power panel now in focus. Cory Gardner, former Republican senator of Colorado and chairman of the Senate Leadership Fund, and Jose Aristimuño, former DNC deputy press secretary. Gentlemen, great to see you. You. Senator Gardner, there is a reason why this is so critical that we don't let go of this at this moment. In your opinion, what would that be?
Well, if you read some of the excerpts of the books that are now coming out, you see phrases like the White House, the presidency was operated like a board of directors. If the White House, if the presidency was operated like a board of directors and Joe Biden was simply a member of the board, who is the CEO? This is beyond just Sleepy Joe. This is beyond putting a do not disturb sign on the Oval Office. This goes to the heart, Harris, of a very serious constitutional question. Who was the acting president of the United States? Who was leading this country? If he was just a board member, other people were executing directives at their own will, operating the auto pen at their own will, who was in charge? Remember, Under Donald Trump, how many reporters, including some who are now writing books about Joe Biden's acuity, they were all asking, talking, rumoring about the 25th Amendment? Were the members of the so-called board of directors running this country, were they talking about the 25th Amendment? If they were not, why were they not talking about it? Because it is clear that there was a significant constitutional crisis taking place, that the President of the United States lacked the capacity to be the president of this country.
Well, it's interesting because Democrats talked about a constitutional crisis.
They certainly did.
I don't think this was the one they meant. Opinion piece in the New York Times today has this headline: Biden is a scapegoat. The Democrats are the problem. An excerpt references that new books on Biden's decline and the cover-up, quote, the authors depict a Democratic Party, a White House staff, and a Biden campaign that, though aware of the weakness, forgetfulness, confusion, and incoherence afflicting Biden, remained largely silent about it. They opted instead to accommodate and rationalize anyone questioning or even inquiring about Biden's physical or mental competence faced intense pushback from the White House. Jose, first of all, your reaction to just that piece.
Look, it's concerning here. I think first and foremost, I don't have doubt in my mind that President Biden had the last word on the major decisions and all the decisions that he had to make as president. But I am concerning about even the cancer, for example. I think it's very concerning that they now announced that he had cancer stage 4 or an aggressive form of cancer. How did they know the White House, with such advanced technology and medicine, how did they not check on the president pretty regularly, right? So the timing of the cancer diagnosis, for me, it is a little strange, and I think we demand answers. But on the cognitive decline, I think there are exaggerations. I think obviously the Republicans want to take advantage of the moment. Democrats should address it. They should be held accountable if people were hiding some of the situations about the president. But we ought to move forward as a party and talk about the issues that the American people care about: border security, the economy, you name it.
Well, and I would say with Republicans, why not get an investigation going here? I mean, look, Jose's asking legitimate questions about this. Everybody is. Why not?
There must be an investigation. Look, maybe Joe Biden had the last word, but what was that last word? I don't remember. I can't recall. Not knowing the dates of something, not being able to put together a coherent sentence in that last word, so somebody else put a document in front of it and he signed it in front of him and he signed it. These are serious questions that require an investigation, not a Republican-driven led investigation, but a Democrat-Republican serious look at the last 4 years of the president's administration. What happened? Who was in charge? Who was leading? And who was calling the shots? The American people deserve that. In fact, our Constitution demands that.
Right. Well, it's possible that there was some complicity even among Democrats on the Hill. I think Republicans have to get this started because these unelected officials potentially behind the scenes certainly weren't doing the will of the people. They weren't chosen to do it. We need to know who they were. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thanks.
I think Geneva may be the next stop, and then you eventually go to somewhere where you get all three major leaders of all the parties. You get the President Putin, and President Zelensky together and hammer this thing out and come to some type of signed document that ends this war.
President Trump's special envoy to Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, teasing potential next steps in peace talks with Russia. But there's a war of words escalating between Putin and Trump. The president posting this on Truth Social after a weekend attack on Ukraine, saying, I've always had a very good relationship with Putin of Russia, but something has happened to him. He has gone absolutely crazy. General Jack Keane is here. And General, there is a think tank in the UK called the Royal United Services, and they have this headline: Ukraine prepares for a Russian summer offensive, and that Russia will seek to intensify operations to build pressure during negotiations, but the pressure cannot be sustained indefinitely. We'll love your take on what you think is happening as this escalates.
Well, there's no doubt that Russia will do another offensive this summer. They're certainly in preparation for that. But, I mean, right in front of us, I think clearly what is happening is Russia is not going to any peace ceasefire, temporary for 30 days or so, and certainly not to a permanent one in the near term. They've been unwilling to make any concessions whatsoever. And I think the fact that they continue to target civilians and kill civilians, I believe, is Putin's attempt to put more pressure on the president, because the president got involved in stopping this war largely because of the killing that's taken place. And he said it time and time again, and I think it's very sincere about that. And Putin sees that as an opportunity to put pressure on the president, to get him to back away. And I think that's what's happening. And listen, 25 years we've known Putin. And for those 25 years, he's been a war criminal and has targeted civilians. He's doing it right now, as we see, on a daily basis. He began in 2000 when he took power in Chechnya, killing tens of thousands of Chechnyans in villages, destroying entire villages and neighborhoods in Grozny. He was trying to chase down radicals who believed were a threat to his regime. But he was targeting civilians primarily. And then in Aleppo, Syria, in 2015 and 16, tens of thousands of people, carpet bombing not seen since World War II, using chlorine bombs, using deep penetration bombs to penetrate hospitals that were built under the ground because of the air campaign. This is the history of the war criminal, Vladimir Putin. And he's up to it again here, right in front of our eyes. And I think it's time for the president to pull the trigger here and crippling sanctions along with the Senate and the House and what the Europeans want to do, and also continue to provide military assistance to Ukraine is absolutely essential. That will get Putin's attention for sure.
And do those sanctions have to be, what is the scope and scale of those sanctions for it to have an impact that would be noticeable right away?
Well, of course, Putin has never really been that intimidated by sanctions because he always believes he can work around them. And he has done a large part of that when the war began and the United States and Europe imposed sanctions on him. But the sanctions that are planned now are much more targeted. They're on secondary sources who are certainly buying his oil, gas, and uranium, and also on the central banks. Both of those sanctions will have more adverse impact on him. And listen, his defense industrial base is really challenged. China is helping him quite a bit, certainly, as is Iran, and to a lesser degree, North Korea. But it is very challenging. He's losing hundreds of tanks within a couple of month period, and he can only produce 25 to 30 a month to catch up to that. So he has challenges, and of course the casualties are well known that he's taken. He's closing in on close to 50,000 casualties a month now. It was over close to 40,000 in 2024. So
and how vulnerable is Zelensky?
He wants to convey the message. Yeah, Putin wants to convey the message to his people that he's resisting the United States and NATO, who are encroaching him, and he's the dominating player here. He's overwhelming Ukraine. Zelensky has conceded. He wants to go to the negotiations. He wants a ceasefire. The people of Ukraine want the same thing. He starts to run out of ammunition from the United States come the summer. And we've got to continue to provide that, or obviously Ukraine's going to be in trouble. And that's what Putin is counting on, that the United States will back away. That's the card he is playing here, Dana.
General Jack Keane, lots to think about, and we appreciate you walking us through it. We'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, you take care.
Was a big deal over the weekend. It's impossible to ignore, even though this war seems to have lasted forever, that Russia started unprovoked, is Russia. I mean, the numbers are stunning, how much they have actually bombed and how much action they have actually taken. Look at these numbers as we bring in Daniel Hoffman about what they've done. Over the past week, they've directed 1,390 drones, 94 missiles targeted across Ukraine. The attacks killed 30 civilians and injured more than 163. These are over civilian sites. They're trying to bombard Kyiv and make some progress on the ground. In addition to ballistic missiles, they fired another 900 drones and 65 cruise missiles. I'm encouraged by this. Germany's new Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, says the U.S., Germany, France, and UK will no longer impose range restrictions on Ukraine's use of weapons supplied by Western allies like ATACMS and HIMARS. Joining us now is former CIA station chief over in Moscow, Daniel Hoffman. Daniel, why is Putin refusing to even pretend to take an off-ramp that Trump's taking tremendous political risk, a lot of political risk to give him?
Well, I think, look, from the beginning I've said that we've got to be careful about assuming that Putin wants an off-ramp. He was the one who launched this brutal invasion over 3 years ago. He has swiveled Russia to an axis of dictatorships. His closest allies are now China and North Korea and Iran. Ukraine for Putin was always an existential threat, not because Ukraine was going to invade Russia or anything of the sort. It's that Ukraine has this sizable Russian-speaking population, and Ukraine was developing close commercial and strategic ties with Europe, and Putin could never allow that. If you've ever been to Estonia, where I used to live for years, the thing that really bothers Vladimir Putin is when he looks out over at Estonia and how successful the Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, those Baltic states are. It's in direct contrast to over the border in Russia. It's like the Wizard of Oz movie where you go from black and white to color, where one side is vibrant economically with great medical care and education systems, and on the other side they're living in like the 19th century. So that's what Putin wanted. I'll just say one last thing, Brian. When I was serving in Russia, I was an old Russian intelligence officer who told me that the West just didn't understand Putin. If Putin lives in a not so great house, not literally because he's got a great palatial estate, but Russia's not so nice, and his neighbor lives in a nicer place, he's just going to go burn down his neighbor's home, and so they can both live in squalor. That's sort of the way that Putin looks at things.
All right, something to keep in mind. So it doesn't bother him. Now his economy shifted to the point where it would really hurt them to stop making weapons, right? And not be at war.
Well, they've got an unbalanced wartime economy. They'd be better off economically if they stopped the war, stopped the brain drain of Russians fleeing Russia, the ones who can, and if they swiveled their economy to the West again. But Putin doesn't want to do that. He would be better off if he did it, but he doesn't want to do it because what's most important to him is his own regime security, and what scares him the most is democracy. I was talking about that on Fox yesterday on TV. That's what scares Putin. He doesn't see the world the way we do, and even though President Trump is concerned about thousands of soldiers and civilians being killed, Putin doesn't care. He's never cared. It doesn't matter to him.
I guess so. Here's what General Keane says we could do. Cut 18.
What should be done, the president almost answered. Crippling sanctions, to be sure, but also, listen, this is important because Putin pays attention to this actually more than he does with sanctions. He always thinks he can get around sanctions, and he has some evidence to prove it. And that is continued military assistance to Ukraine. That makes a difference on the battlefield. After all, we're 39 months into the war, and Putin isn't even close to taking control of Ukraine. He's still trying to get control of the 4 provinces, or oblasts as Ukrainians call them, that he believes are theirs. And Ukraine still owns 2 of the oblast capital cities. So Putin is nowhere near where he wants to be, and we can stop him from getting there, certainly.
So look, the Ukraine says they have money. They want to be able to buy stuff. They have a motivated European Union to help him. We don't have the patriots to spare to give him, but the other Western nations do. What's possible in this environment, Dan?
Well, first of all, we need to rebuild our defense industrial base.
I know.
That's important for us to be the arsenal of democracy and support our allies who are trying to deter aggression. That would be Taiwan and among others, Israel is in a fight. Look, if we don't do what we've always done, which is to support our fellow democracies, then we're going to be in a bad place. But General Keane is right. We need to increase military support to Ukraine and make it clear to Putin that this war of his is a loser. Putin has failed. He is not winning the war. His strategic objective was to overthrow the government of Kyiv and establish a new puppet regime there that would be beholden to him, and he's failed to do that, and he's suffered a lot of consequences that his own people know about, specifically his military and intelligence services. And that's one reason why Putin continues this war. I'm sorry to say it's likely to go on as long as Putin is alive or still in power. You almost need to convince the guys around him that the war is just not winnable and they need to swivel in a different direction.
Dan, do you really believe that that is it? That someone has to take him out for this to stop? How about the $300 billion that is frozen? What if we just give it to Ukraine? You know, what if third-party sanctions on India and China? You know, what if the gas price of per barrel of oil stays around $60? I mean, that could really make life uncomfortable, along with central bank sanctions.
It could. It's the penultimate question I'd be asking Director of CIA Ratcliffe. Give me some evidence to show that this is Putin's war, and he's not going to let go of it until he's gone. Give me evidence to the contrary, please, because he doesn't care how much his country suffers as a result of his war. And I'm just not so sure I see him stopping. What we can do is we can stop the onslaught and make it clear to the Russian military that carrying on the war just isn't anything but resulting in more cannon fodder. And what that does is builds up the pressure inside Russia to make Putin stop. We're not going to make him stop, but his own military might, his own intelligence services might, but we're not going to do it alone. The way we do it is by making it clear to all those Russian soldiers that every step they take forward is going to result in a bullet to their head. That's it, Brian. I'm sorry to say it, but that's what Putin's doing to us. And
I hear you, but a couple of things have to happen.
I say it based on the years I spent there and trying to see the world through the twisted KGB eyes of Vladimir Putin. He's not like us. And if you mirror image, you end up in a bad place.
But, you do have an off-ramp with saving face, with an economic incentives from Trump, who doesn't care what people think. He's going to go, yep, I told them we're going to do a rare earth deal with them. I told them we're going to get him, supplement his the issues he's got with agriculture. And he could automatically, all of a sudden, have a dialogue with the superpower of the world, along with China. I could see that if he was a clear-thinking guy, the advantage at 72 years old of doing that. But a couple of things happened that are not predicted. Because Russia's distracted with Ukraine, they took their eye off the ball and they lost Syria. And guess who else lost Syria? Iran. And guess what could happen too? If Iran, I think, continues to drag us out in talks and embarrass this president, and if Israel feels they're threatened, and they are weeks away, they could lose Iran. And then they lose their drone factory. Am I correct?
That's certainly possible. Iran is weaker today than they've ever been, thanks to the fact that Israel has decimated Iran's proxy terrorists as well as Iran's air defenses. So, yes, you're right. And Russia doesn't have the wherewithal to support anybody else militarily. Yes. They're so focused on Ukraine. So that enters into this discussion as well.
When I look at what's going on with Iran right now, I saw they had a desperate move before President went to Saudi Arabia to try to get a consortium to enrich uranium outside 3 countries, UAE. Right. All right. That seems to me pretty desperate. Number 2 is Israel has already shown they got incredible intelligence about where this stuff is located, where the nuclear material is located, where the factories are. If these talks continue to produce nothing of substance, Trump's not going to have a choice. He doesn't want to start a Middle East war, but he's not a dumb guy. He's got to know that he's being played. And if he walks away with a deal that looks like Obama's, that's for him is his kryptonite. Anyone who compares this deal to the one that he got elected in ripping up, I think that both things are heading our direction. Trump gave every option to Iran, is giving every option to Putin, and they are walking away from 2 deals of a lifetime. And it should not surprise you, Dan, but it surprises me.
Yeah, well, they're acting rationally. Russia, Putin, and the Ayatollah, they're acting rationally for them. But look, Brian, I don't disagree with you at all. The president gave Iran 2 months. We're kind of at that point right now. And so a decision is going to have to be made about what we do about Iran's nuclear program. They're a nuclear threshold state. They are super close to weaponizing a nuclear weapon, a bomb, and that would be catastrophic for the region and beyond because of Iran's ballistic missile program. So this is another one. Look, that one, Gaza, the war in Ukraine, deterring China from launching on Taiwan. Let's not forget that we've got a terrorist problem thanks to the withdrawal from Afghanistan, which has left us more vulnerable than ever, where ISIS and Al-Qaeda have the kind of open field running in South Asia that they haven't had since before 9/11. So there's a lot of terrorist threats out there and plenty of work for our intelligence community and the National Security Council staff to work on.
They do, but sooner or later, these moving parts, the spinning plates have to come down. And they might be all coming down at the same time. And I always trust Israel's instincts better than ours because they understand the region better. Not Russia, but when it comes to Hamas and Iran. And I think they are running out of patience. And they've already shown in the past they will act alone, even before Netanyahu is in power. So I think something's going to happen. Do you think something's going to happen soon?
Well, reportedly, Israel was poised to launch a strike, and they held off. So, I mean, look, that's the weapon is like locked and loaded at Iran. And if Iran doesn't come to a deal with the United States, then this is what's going to is what they're going to have to deal with. And that would be catastrophic for the region, and we want to avoid that. But at some point, you don't get a deal if you don't legitimately threaten the consequences of not making a deal. And that's what the president needs to do.
I know. It's about time. It's got to come soon.
Yeah.
Dan, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
All right, Brian. Have a great rest of your week.
You got it. Thanks for the insight.
President Trump with a warning just moments ago on his Truth Social. He is warning Russian President Putin that he is, in quote, playing with fire, end quote, and to put a stop to the needless killings in Ukraine. This is Outnumbered. I'm Harris Faulkner, here with my co-hosts Kayleigh McEnany and Emily Campagno. Also joining us today, Cheryl Casoni, Fox Business anchor and host of American Dream Home on Fox Business. Paul Morrow, Fox News contributor and former commanding officer of the NYPD intelligence operations. It is a war of words right now, after Russia launched an unprecedented and deadly drone and missile attack on Ukraine. President Trump took to Truth Social to go after Putin's vicious act. First, he wrote, "I've always had a very good relationship with Vladimir Putin of Russia, but something has happened to him. He has gone absolutely crazy." The Kremlin responded by saying Trump might be suffering from, quote, emotional overload because of the crucial nature of the ongoing negotiations. However, President Trump obviously is not going to back down. And again, a warning that he put more pressure on Putin if he does not move to quickly end the war against Ukraine.
You've talked before about putting more sanctions on Russia. Is that something you're considering more serious?
Absolutely. He's killing a lot of people. I don't know what's wrong with him. What the hell happened to him, right? He's killing a lot of people. I'm not happy about that.
And again, President Trump from just moments ago. Let's take a look at it. What Vladimir Putin doesn't realize is if it weren't for me, lots of really bad things would have already happened to Russia, and I mean really bad. He's playing with fire, exclamation point. Kayleigh.
Yeah, what I read into that is that President Trump has offered Putin somewhat of a lifeline. In other words, he's put Crimea on the table, saying, look, maybe there is a way to end this war and end the killing in exchange for some territory going to Russia. Other presidents haven't done that. He's a negotiator at heart. And, you know, who would Putin rather negotiate with? If he doesn't take this lifeline now, President Trump has warned about dire things. And in Putin's mind, I would be thinking about the 1 million killed or wounded in Ukraine. 1 million. That's an extraordinary number. And what have you gotten in return for that, President Putin? 1% more of Ukrainian territory than when the war began. So the initial gains made into Ukraine in the 3 years that interceded, 1 million wounded or dead, and you got 1% more territory. So this is a bad deal for the Russian people. But what Putin has on his side is the polling I was looking at in The Economist, where prior to this war, 60% of Russians said the #1 priority was livelihood, was the economy. Now it's totally inversed, and 55% say the #1 priority is Russia being a great world power. So he has managed to shift the attitude of the Russian people, and that makes this man a very dangerous character as he builds up construction on Estonia's border. You got to wonder what his end goals are in time.
Look, to the point about Crimea, Paul, last hour, Congressman Brian Mast was doing something that a lot of Republicans are doing, and that is quoting the Secretary of State Marco Rubio, saying, to come to the table, it might mean that Russia keeps what it's taken and Ukraine gets to, and I'm paraphrasing him, gets to go forward in all of this. What does it take? Because as Kayleigh just laid out, this guy is bloodthirsty and he's not going to stop.
Yeah, so let's zoom out a little bit here and look at what's really going on here. The world is realigning, and Putin, everybody thinks he's the chess master behind the curtain here, but in a lot of ways, he's playing into Donald Trump's hands. And what do I mean by that? The left always says there's no Trump doctrine. If there is one foreign policy doctrine that Trump adheres to, is that we are not going to lose our blood and treasure in foreign adventurism, right? He's aware of the history, not only of America, but the great powers throughout history, the Romans, the Ottomans, the Persians. You can go back through history. So he doesn't want to get involved in this intimately. So what does Donald Trump want? Number one, he's the first person who's ever held NATO to account. All right, they're supposed to put 2% of their GDP into military. None of them do it. In fact, they would brag about it, and they would run. So politicians in Europe would run on the fact that they're not going to do it. Now they've committed, not only are more of them on board, they've committed to 5% in a couple of years. Number two, Germany, for the first time since World War II, and people could have mixed feelings about this, has agreed to forward deploy about 5,000 personnel with a mechanized unit into Lithuania. First time since World War II, the Germans have forward deployed Army personnel. That's new. That's NATO muscularizing. The second thing is this. We need to know where our money goes. Democrats have blocked every oversight attempt relative to the Ukrainian aid that America has over the last couple of years. Those are the two prongs. It's essentially a shadow doge here. We need to know, as we support Ukraine, and any foreign policy choice is your least bad choice. But we have equities there. And so you need to know where the money is going, and we need to contain Russia here, because if Putin has his way, as Kayleigh says, he's a bad guy, he'll kill millions, and if he can roll all the way to Berlin, he'll do it.
Well, it makes you wonder, too, if you could ever trust him. I mean, you did a minerals deal with Ukraine, and basically that commits us to protecting those assets that we have on the ground, which means we're on the ground. What if Putin decides to roll again? Talk to me about the money in all of this, Cheryl.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the point about GDP and military spending in Europe and NATO. But on the other side of this, what we learned when we watched President Trump in the Middle East, this is an administration and a president that believes in peace through commerce. Let's strike deals. Right. The minerals deal is a perfect example in Ukraine. One of the things ahead of these comments yesterday, or excuse me, Sunday from President Trump, was that I think that there was a feeling that they could do some kind of commerce deal with Putin, open up the economic lines of communications between ourselves and the Russians. That seems to be off the table from the rhetoric we're now hearing from President Trump and the posts we're seeing on Truth Social. At the same time, remember, Senator Lindsey Graham is the one that told Putin a while ago, reportedly, I'll say that Putin's not going to want a deal. He's not going to agree to a ceasefire of 30 days. He wants to keep going. He wants to keep the land that he has. That's something that President Trump is pushing back on. The final thing I'll add here is that the sanction pressure can work, because now what they're talking about is you put sanctions on countries that are doing business with Russia. Yeah. They're buying the oil, they're buying the gas, they're buying your uranium. You put steep tariffs on them. That's where you put the pressure on Putin, and that is his pocketbook.
Emily.
Yeah, I was in Poland for the weekend, and so it was really interesting to see sort of like the BBC coverage and the point of view from their neighbors there, and a very pro-Ukrainian position throughout Poland, and also the knowledge of the U.S.'s might with the sanctions potential. And we know on Monday, Putin was, saying that they were grateful to America for participating in these negotiations and to defend this horrific attack on the basis of, as they said, Kyiv's attack on their social infrastructure. I mean, it's disproportionate is not even a strong enough word, frankly. So I think the world is aghast at what seems to be a completely bad faith maneuver by Putin in these negotiations. But at the end of the day, we have Germany now stepping in and saying, look, they're all limits are off with the missiles that we supply. There's no more range issues. And we know that was sort of the hamstringing that was coming from many countries, especially ours during the prior administration. So my point is that I think the coupling of hopefully the sanctions with the lifting of the range restrictions by the neighboring countries will serve to help. But I note what the vice president said last week, which was essentially, look, if you guys keep this up, both sides, we're going to pull out. He said this isn't our war.
Let me ask you this. Fabulous to learn that you were in beautiful Poland. Emily, was there talk among citizens you spoke with about, well, what if Putin picks another country?
No, we didn't. It was really historically based. So we talked more about the current situation, and then in light of how often that these borders, which we sort of see as fixed in 2025, frankly aren't and haven't been for centuries, and the massive negative impact that it has had, not only geopolitically, but socially and culturally, especially with the Jews there. So people's memories run far deeper and far longer than our 4-year administration increments, which is why I think that the patience and the long-term investment exhibited by, say, Putin can be, on one hand, dangerous, but on other, deeply educational for us to see.
But you know what? Poland has always been right near the top on NATO spending, so they know.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. Remember the early call for the planes? They were right there. Well, up next, Jake Tapper says the alleged cover-up of President Biden's decline might be worse than Watergate.
Russia launching its largest aerial attack of the entire 3-year war, angering President Trump in the process. The New York Post cover calling it a war of the words between Trump and Russian President Putin. Special envoy to Russia and Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, will join us on that in just moments. But first, senior foreign affairs correspondent Greg Palkot. Greg, what is the latest on the fighting in Ukraine?
Well, Sandra, getting worse as that rhetoric heats up between President Trump and Russian President Putin. So does the war. Russia targeting Ukraine with another 60 drones overnight, hitting industrial and agricultural areas after that record-setting weekend with Moscow firing 900 drones as well as missiles, leaving death and destruction in Kyiv and across Ukraine. Also, Russia taking 4 border towns near the northeastern Ukrainian city of Sumy in an attempt to create what Putin calls a buffer zone. Russian troops haven't been there since the early stages of this war when they were driven out by Ukrainian forces. Meanwhile, families are reuniting after the recent mass exchange of Ukrainian and Russian prisoners, the only real tangible thing to come out of face-to-face talks between the two countries earlier this month. No new talks are yet planned. The Kremlin saying today it is working on a draft peace proposal as Ukraine gets in some licks of its own, firing drones into 7 different Russian regions. Also overnight, Moscow claims to have shot down nearly 100 as Kyiv's stockpiles are running low and the battle goes on. Sandra.
All right, Greg Palkot on that for us. Greg, thank you.
Meantime, Germany lifting range restrictions on weapons it sends to Ukraine as well, joining the U.S. and other key allies to bolster their ground defense. Let's bring in Kurt Vulker, former special representative for Ukraine negotiations during the first Trump term and now former ambassador to NATO. Mr. Ambassador, I want to read you this. Just in from the Kremlin, Dmitry Medvedev, the former Russian president, now the deputy chief of the Security Council, says this. Regarding Trump's words about Putin playing with fire and really bad things happening to Russia, I only know of one really bad thing, World War III. I hope Trump understands this. Are you shaking in your boots?
Exactly. I would not pay any attention to Medvedev, and I wouldn't pay any attention to that kind of bluffing. And clearly, Russia does not want World War III, and if we were involved, Russia would not last very long. So I would not put any stock in that. What I would say, though, is that we do need to put more pressure on Vladimir Putin. He continues to ignore President Trump. He continues to launch these attacks against Ukraine, killing lots of people. And this is not new. He's been doing this for years. He has just escalated as President Trump is calling for an end to the war. So I think it's time to actually put some hard pressure on Putin.
What do you make about President Trump's public comments, like the one we played for you there in the intro, where he seems oddly to feel betrayed by Putin?
Yeah. Well, I don't know what his past relationship with Putin was, going way back. But
he says he's known him a long time and they always get along well. Those were his words over the weekend as well.
That's what he said. And we have seen Putin attack neighboring countries, Georgia in 2008, Ukraine in 2014 and 15, Ukraine again in 2022. He's also murdered opponents at home like Navalny. He's murdered opponents abroad like Litvinenko in the UK. He's conducted hybrid attacks against NATO countries, which he still does on an ongoing basis. So there should be no surprise here. We know what Putin's about. He's also declared his intentions with respect to Ukraine. He doesn't believe Ukraine should be a sovereign, independent country. He believes it should be part of Russia because he wants to rebuild the Russian Empire. So unless we are fine with that and all the threats to Europe that implies, he just needs to be stopped now. And we can turn up the heat, and we should be doing it.
I mean, where I come from, you would call him a monster, among other things. But yet the Trump administration, take a listen to General Kellogg on our air this morning talking about moving forward with more negotiations.
When President Trump spoke with President Putin a little over a week ago, the Russians said they were going to come up with what they call a memorandum, which what I call a term sheet. We've got that from the Ukrainian side. We need to get that from the Russian side. Then we'll put it together, and then there's going to be another meeting, and we believe it'll be probably in Geneva.
What do you think?
Well, we know what the Russian terms will be. They're going to say that they want to have recognition of all of the territory that Russia has claimed to annex from Ukraine. They want that recognized as Russian territory. That includes pieces of Ukraine that Russia has not militarily taken. They want Ukraine to withdraw from those areas. They want Ukraine to have a new government.
Which, by the
they
way,
want
is
Ukraine
a non-starter,
not to have a military.
Right, on the U.S. side.
Right, of course.
Yeah.
All of these are non-starters. We know what this is going to say. And the reason that Putin feels comfortable putting out these kinds of demands, as they did in Istanbul, as they've done in letters in the past, or as they will do in this memorandum if they ever produce it, they feel comfortable because they don't really feel any pressure to end the war. And so here, I think what President Trump has hinted at, secondary sanctions that would really hit Russia's gas and oil and financial sectors so that they cannot get the money to continue this war. I think that is absolutely essential. And we also need to have a pathway in place where Ukraine will get air defense weapons and other defensive arms, ammunition, military supplies on an ongoing basis, not paid for by taxpayers, but Ukraine paying its own way, either borrowing the money from us and paying us back later, or getting Europe to pay, or using this minerals deal. But we need to show Putin that he's never going to actually win this militarily. He's only going to weaken Russia. And it's that kind of logic that I think can get Putin to wind this down.
Trump alluding to those secondary sanctions over the weekend, he said it's essentially something that he is considering as a possible, end to the current impasse. Yeah. Let's hope that he decides quickly.
Trump has said this at least 3 times. He said at least 3 times he's considering it, but it's time to act.
All right, Mr. Ambassador, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.